Shalom Aleichem. My name is Natan Shahar. I live in Elon More in Shomron. I moved here with my family about 3 years ago from Flatbush in New York City. And I'm talking today about practical steps of making Aliya to Eretz Yisrael. The most important thing for any Jew in the world to understand, whether they live in the land of Israel or they live outside the land of Israel, is that life today in the land of Israel has never been better at any other point in our history, period. You can look at any statistic, any measure. The country has never been as wealthy, it's never been as powerful. There's never been people with as good jobs, nice homes, cars, good health care. Every level of measuring human well-being from an economic standpoint, social standpoint, it's never been better than it is today, right now. So anybody who's thinking about relative to the challenges of making Aliyah, it's important to keep in mind that everybody that made Aliyah yesterday had a much more difficult challenge than those thinking about making Aliyah today. And so that's something that you should just keep in mind when you say, oh, I'm waiting for it to be this much more easy or that much easier, or I need to have this much money or that much money, because we're living in a golden era and it hopefully will keep getting better, but who knows. There are a couple things that have really made the Aliyah picture a lot easier, especially in the past 10 years today in the land of Israel, that everybody should keep in mind. Number one is the revolution of the internet, and number two is the opening up of the Israeli economy. What the internet has done is it means that anybody with skills can now sell those skills to anywhere in the world. So for instance, I live in Elon More, which is about an hour and a half drive from Jerusalem, an hour and a half drive from Tel Aviv. I run a business over the internet from my house. I don't really need to leave very much for work. I have 2 employees in New York City, 2 employees in Israel, each living in different locations. Everything is done online. I'm a licensed mechanical engineer in New York, and I'm able to do everything I was doing in New York from here, over the internet. This is just on an individual level. Then on a general level, because of the internet, there are thousands of Israeli companies that now offer services to people all over the world. And what's driving the growth of a lot of those companies is, again, the platform of the internet. They're doing things for innovations on the internet, or they're selling services over the internet. The internet is tied together the world in a way where it used to be you moved to the land of Israel and your whole economic sphere was limited to the few million people that are living here. Today, that's expanded to everybody on the planet. And that means that the scale of opportunities that's available to somebody living in Israel is very similar to the scale of opportunity of somebody living in Paris or New York City or London or Sydney. In parallel to this is the opening up of the Israeli economy. It used to be 30 years ago, and that most jobs in some way in Israel were connected to government-controlled labor unions and state-owned companies. Over the past 30 years, things have changed a lot, and there's a lot more activity in the private sector. There are a lot more companies that need people and are recruiting people, and even more positively for Olim, there's enormous demand for people who come from outside the land of Israel, who know foreign languages, that can work in all sorts of marketing and sales and other positions that require people to understand the culture and the language overseas. So I would say that anybody considering Aliyah should realize that it's not only possible and practical, but it's more possible today than it has ever been. It's easier today than it's ever been. And really what is required to do it is just a decision to come and make it happen. There are parts of Israel that are very expensive to live. There are parts that are very cheap. When I moved from New York City to Elon More, I cut my rent in about a quarter. I pay about 25% now in rent what I used to pay in New York City for a similar apartment. Because I moved from a very expensive place to a very cheap place. Housing does not need to be expensive here. It depends on where you live. People here have cars, they have jobs, they have health care, they get along, they manage. I go outside, I look at the shopping malls, they're packed, people have money. We're not in any way, shape, or form living in the midst of a crisis, and it's possible to have the same standard of living that you have in the United States as you have in the land of Israel. You just need to think through all the steps clearly. So I strongly encourage it. I think that Aliya is for every Jew, and I think that not only is it for every Jew, but I think now is the time. It's important to keep in mind that this golden era that we have today, where you have a free plane ticket to move to Israel, and the government gives you money when you arrive at the airport to help you get established, and things are going relatively well from a security and economic standpoint, doesn't need to stay the same. We just 100 years ago, shortly after the British took over control of Eretz Israel, for the whole decade of the 1920s until the Hebron massacre, the doors were open in Eretz Israel. Any Jew anywhere in the world could move to Israel, and there was enormous economic growth at that time as well. There were challenges for sure, but there was enormous economic growth. It was right after the First World War. The British had just come in. They were investing in developing the country, and all the Jews in Europe and America were able to move here with all their money and resources and self-respect, and choose to move to Israel and establish themselves. And then at the end of the 1920s, that all changed. The British started restricting immigration. The global economy fell into the Great Depression, and it became much more difficult for any Jew who wanted to live in the land of Israel to move here, because there were very tight immigration quotas on the amount of Jews, and the economic situation was much more challenging. So the lesson to be learned from that is that when the doors are open, when the conditions are good, you should take the opportunity. Jump on the boat, jump on the plane, and get moving. Now is the time. The doors are open. Economically, it is a practical time to make the move. I strongly encourage it. Shkoyach.